Hey, it's James Davey, the Exam Coach, checking in with episode 233 of the Exam Coach podcast. And this is the start of a new type of podcast I'll be rolling out. It's a new series, and I'm happy to announce it because I think it's going to be really valuable for you guys. Because what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be interviewing tutors, subject tutors, and asking them targeted questions to get them to give you some great advice on how to learn their subject better and basically how to do better in the exam, which is what we all want to do at the end of this year or whenever you've got your exams coming up. So, a bit of housekeeping to start off with. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. It's cracking to have you. If you've been here a while and you think I deserve a decent review on iTunes, please feel free to head there and get it done. And lastly, if you've got exams coming up this year, check out the 7-day exam plan on WhatsApp. It is the best way I've found so far. 5 years of doing this exam coaching stuff. I've put it all into this WhatsApp support system, and it's designed to put you in the best position to succeed in your exams when you're taking them. Back to today. Okay, today we're going to be interviewing Rebekah Elliott, and Rebekah has been tutoring for 8 years since she started her company Elliott Education back in 2011. And it's funny how she started, actually. She started just by providing 11 plus tutoring as a favour to one of her friends in her home county of Lincolnshire. Since then, she's grown the brand to include tutoring for history and English up to A-level and pre-U standard, and some maths, particularly for Key Stage 2 and 3. And through the use of online tutoring, Rebekah now teaches students throughout the UK and internationally across 3 different continents. Through Elliott Educational, Rebekah also produces resources to support students learning in the classroom and at home. And these are all available through the Elliott Educational TES store. Rebekah is a graduate of the University of Nottingham and a qualified teacher. She lives in North Lincolnshire and is married to Stephen and is mum to Ethan and Isaac. In this episode, we're going to touch on what makes a great tutor, how to build your English vocabulary, as well as some specifics on how to do better in both English and history. Let's get into it. Hi, Rebekah. It's great to have you on the show today.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So I thought I'd get you on because I know you do a bit of tutoring, and I thought the audience today would love to hear about what you've got to say, any tips you have to share. So I think to kick it off, what do you tutor?
Well, I tutor a real range of subjects, actually. I'm a bit of a jack of all trades, you might say, but primarily English, both language and literature, history, and also the 11 plus, because I live in Lincolnshire, where we still have grammar schools, and also I do a little bit of maths, but I prefer the English and the history, in all honesty.
Love it. English and history. Yeah, they were 2 of my favourite subjects too. I did them at A-level, actually. Good fun.
Yes, I listened to your 7-day exam plan, and I noticed that you said that. So
yeah, I think it's interesting with the essay-based subjects. They can seem quite scary because the exams are tough. You go in there, history, it's an absolute lottery. You can get any question, and
absolutely
similar with English. And I definitely had I remember actually my history exams at uni. It just so happened it is a little bit of a gamble with what you decide to revise. You've got to prioritize some areas and think, okay, if that comes up, I'm gonna absolutely nail the exam. If it doesn't, I've just got to learn to pivot out and figure out, okay, here's my kind of secondary strategy, and you apply it and you do as best you can. But ideally, you want to try and spread it out across the board. But those exams are always interesting to me. Anyway. Enough about my exams, and we're talking about your tutoring. So, what do you think is the qualities that the best tutors have? Because I think there's going to be a lot of students and maybe some parents listening to this right now thinking, you've got school, you've got the normal kind of stuff you have to do every day, but what makes tutoring great, and what do you think the best tutors can do for students?
Yeah. So, I mean, the great thing about tutoring, obviously, is All the tutoring I personally do is one-to-one. So obviously the student gets a level of attention and a level of input that's just not possible in the classroom. Even the best classroom practitioners in the world can only give students a certain amount of time when they've got a whole class of people to teach. So obviously the great thing about tutoring is it's tailor-made to your personal needs, and you get as much time and attention as you need. I think obviously tutoring and teaching are quite different. Obviously I am a qualified teacher, so I've done both of those jobs, but I think with tutoring, the obviously the same things that are important with teaching, like subject knowledge, things like that, are obviously really important. But I think as a tutor, you've got to be able to build a rapport with the student, and I think that depends on whatever subject you're teaching. Tutoring doesn't work well if you don't have a good relationship between the tutee and the tutor. And I'm thankful that most of the time I have a great relationship with my students. Occasionally, you do have situations the chemistry is perhaps not quite right, and it can be quite tough then. So you've got to be able to build relationship and build rapport with who you're tutoring. Then in terms of other skills, if you're preparing students for exams, which quite often you are, I think you need to have a really good understanding of exam mark schemes and the exam questions. And also, I think a really important skill as a tutor, and something that I've really tried to develop myself, is that being able to differentiate between what is an essential skill and what is a higher level skill. And what I mean by that is that obviously you get students who are maybe getting tutoring because they are hoping to get a level 4 or a level 5, so get that important pass level at GCSE. This is obviously or to pass their A level, but sometimes you've got students who get tutoring because they're hoping for a level 8 or a level 9 at GCSE, or an A or an A star at A level, and they've come to a tutor to try and get that extra push. You tend to get people who seek out tutoring tend to be in one of those two camps, in my experience. So there are certain skills that the 8 and 9 level candidate, for example, needs that actually to get a grade 4 and a grade 5, you don't necessarily need to be able to do those things. So it's working out what the core and important things are that a student needs to do to achieve their potential, rather than just saying, oh well, all students need to be able to do this really high level thinking skill that actually they're probably never going to master.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
I totally agree. I think the two things you said there on the rapport building as a teacher, definitely. I mean, the workshops that I do, you've got 100, 120 students in there, and it's easier to build a rapport with them, because even if there are ones that don't find your jokes funny or just aren't up for it that day, there's going to be a couple, 2 or 3, 4, maybe 10 or so who laugh and can build the energy. Whereas when you're tutoring, you just got that one person with you in the room, and you've really got to be on the ball with making sure that things are enjoyable and that you can relate to them and make the message cut through and be meaningful. And I think the whole rapport building element of tutoring is really, really interesting, and the better you are emotionally and your emotional skills, the better you can get that message across.
Absolutely. And sometimes it's just like life, really. There are certain people you just hit it off with in life, and it's just easy, and it's not hard work. And there are other people who you don't, and it's always quite hard work to get that conversation going and things like that. And it's no different just because it's relationship, I always think it's really no different from everyday life. There are some people who you just get on with better than others, and but as you say, it can be quite awkward. And I think with tutoring as well, it can depend on the circumstances by which the student has found themselves in a tutoring session. So obviously some of them have asked their parents and said, "Oh, I really need more help with this. I'm not sure I'm going to get the grade I need for my college or university course or whatever," and they're usually really grateful. But you do get some students who obviously their parents realise that they're struggling and they think, right, we're really going to have to get them some extra help. And some of them, there is a little bit of resentment there that they'd rather be doing something else than sitting doing an extra hour's work after school, which I can kind of understand on the one hand. So it really can depend on that and to how engaged with the whole process of getting a tutor that the student is, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, getting the buy-in, that's something that I really try and work on with the students who are doing any of the exam coach stuff or materials out there, is finding out, why do you want to do this? What are the reasons behind it? Is it you want to, anything from just wanting to do well to maybe wanting to prove that teacher back in year 4 who said that you couldn't do well in maths, or maybe said something that you didn't agree with? Or is it to just prove to yourself that you can achieve very difficult things, or things that you thought were difficult? It's all stuff that you can then apply later on in life to whatever you really, really, really do want to do, and it's going to help you out. I think the other thing about the essential skills versus higher level, quick comment on that for anyone listening, is I always see exams and building knowledge, it's a bit like a house, and if you're looking at that, building the roof first, that just doesn't make sense. That's not, you have to have that scaffolding up, you have to have the basics, the essential skills.
Yeah, absolutely.
Being able to nail that 4 and 5, getting those key things down, and then looking at, okay, what's that tiny bit of detail that I need to put on the end of a paragraph, or the last step in the big quadratic equation question in maths that's going to get me the top grade. And yet you have to get the basics nailed. So anyway, let's talk about a bit more detail on 2 subjects, English and history.
Yeah.
What are some of the key things that you think students can do to learn English and history more easily and become more successful in their exams? And you can dive into specific exam board or exam types, I suppose. That's GCSE, 11 plus, A level, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I think obviously there's been curriculum reform in the past few years with to GCSE, and one of the things, and with history in particular, one of the things that is a challenge, and I know from speaking to fellow history teachers, and I also do work as an examiner, so speaking to history teachers who are examiners, the big challenge from a teaching point of view, and therefore I think from a student point of view, is that the content of GCSE history is now very, very heavy. There is a lot of content to learn, and some of the textbooks are extremely detailed, more so than I think before curriculum reform. So I think it's really, in order to learn that, you need to try and do it in chunks, and not try and also to try and learn that content as you go along. So not just doing the classwork, but making your revision cards or whatever works for you as you go along. Regularly dipping into those notes, because to learn the amount of content there is now at the end of the course is, I would say, for everyone except the people with the best memories in the world, it is really, really difficult. And I think it, little and often, a bit like when when I was younger, I played the piano. I'm married to a music teacher, so with music, you practice your instrument and you do that little and often, and you build up. And I think that skill's the same with something like history. You need to do a small amount as long. And I think for all subjects, actually, you need to find out what works for you in terms of revision, because you may get I know when I was teaching in a secondary school, occasionally you would get a situation where a teacher had been on a course and they were, I don't know, this course had talked about and extolled the virtues of, I don't know, mind maps or something like that. And this is then being cascaded back to the staff of the school, and suddenly year 11 students find themselves in every subject making a mind map. Now, mind maps are great if they work for you, but I do think they don't work for everybody. And just like, you know, they don't particularly work for me, for example, if I was learning something. So it's finding out what works for you and breaking it down into those chunks, I think. History, I wish, whenever I'm teaching history now, I really think to myself, oh, I wish I'd gone to school now, because the internet is just so amazing. You know, I think parents may be worried that their kids are spending too much time on the internet, but actually the things that are available on the internet is just an amazing resource. You know, YouTube clips. You know, I've got a son who's nearly a teenager, and you know, YouTube is life for a lot of young people, and I know that. But actually, there's so much for history on YouTube. There's passé news clips. There's, you know, bits of documentaries. It's amazing, and those kinds of things can really help with learning that content, you know, in a way that's not just sitting down and reading a book. So I think that's really good. And a lot of the same skills, I think, for A-level, but obviously with your A-level, you've got to really get your head around those interpretations and things like that are so important on some of the questions. And then in terms of English, I think the main thing is just to read. You know, when I'm working with students, the ones who do the best and find it most straightforward to pass their exams are the ones who read for pleasure. They read outside of it because you know, they just get a feel for text and for language, and I just think it's so important because for English language, it's certainly, there's not a lot of specific things you can learn beyond your sort of, you know, literary terms and things like that, but you know, you can really, so I think just reading for pleasure and reading widely is the best thing that students can do for English language. Obviously for English literature, it's a little bit different. There is a bit more content that needs to be learnt, and the same things I think apply as for history in many ways. But there are things like if you're studying a play, for example, and that play happens to be in a theatre near where you live and you can afford to go, try and go and get a ticket and go and see it, because, you know, a play is meant to be watched really, not read, and I think you'll get a lot more out of it. Hopefully maybe sometimes schools will organise a trip like that, but if they don't, you know, be proactive and try and go and see it, because you'll get a lot more out of that then. Other things for English, you know, just looking up unfamiliar words in the dictionary. Again, we're in the modern age. You don't even need to have a dictionary.
Just type it in.
Usually
yeah.
or just ask Siri or Google, or other assistants are available, you know. So
it's interesting you mention that, Rebekah,
because
I just to jump in, when you said the bit about, you know, reading in English,
yes,
it's so important, because I really didn't do that when I was growing up, from probably the age until about probably 15, 16. Reading wasn't something that I did. I just didn't really take pleasure in it. I hadn't really discovered it as a thing that, oh, you can pick up a book of 200 pages and just sit there in an afternoon and have a read. And
yeah,
it just didn't appear. I was doing other things. I was on my PlayStation, outside playing sports. That just didn't really feature.
Absolutely.
And as a result, my vocabulary was pretty limited. I didn't understand words. I remember reading along in class, and people would be reading these words, and I said, I don't know what that means. And it came to it where I just sat down in a summer, and I was actually quite frustrated that I didn't understand a lot of things that were going on in class. And and this was, yeah, I suppose the internet wasn't, it was pretty good actually. In fact, I probably could have done it, but the smartphone, I suppose the difference back then was you had to go on a desktop and type things in when I was,
Yeah,
13, 14. Now you can do it on your phone,
absolutely.
and the
Yeah,
speed's there. You could do it, I think you could do it on a mobile device back then, but it just took ages. Um,
yeah,
Now everything is lightning fast, and but I did just open up a dictionary and just looked at all the words I didn't know and learned them, and
yeah,
that solved a huge problem. And it meant that I
absolutely.
understood the questions and that I was able actually to write in a more kind of clear and direct manner that got the marks in the exam. So,
Yeah,
so
definitely.
important that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was something I started to do in terms of looking up words. That was something when I got to university. Some of the words historians, for some reason, they seem to use complicated words for the sake of it. I think sometimes
I
when you
remember
get
that
to
at
the
uni.
academic history, yeah,
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 I remember
and
that, and I would sit there thinking, why don't you just say it in the most simple terms possible?
absolutely, it's not
But
miscommunication.
yeah, but I think
um,
it's it must be some internal club about only, the academic historians actually being able to decode what you're trying to say.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
it doesn't make too much sense to me, but anyway, that's history for you, isn't it?
Yes,
Good fun.
absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Then the last thing I would just say is, again, because we live in a digital age, I would say to students, for any subject really, just be proactive. You can go on the exam board websites yourself, that you can see past papers there. Most of them have, sometimes obviously you need login details and things to access certain ones, but a lot of them are available, um, for anybody to download. Specifications, I'm not saying go into school and say to the teacher, oh, you haven't taught us this, but be proactive yourself and have a look at things, and I think that's really important. Again, I think that's a life skill anyway, not just waiting to be told, this is what we're going on to next, having some idea. And I think by taking some ownership of learning in that way, then that's really beneficial. And if all else fails, people should get a tutor as well.
Absolutely. And I think
Mm.
that's one of the things that, looking back on exams and having worked with a lot of students on their exams in the last 5 years, the exams
Yeah,
aren't, to me, a test of intelligence. They're also a test of initiative and how much
yes,
responsibility you can take and ownership and,
mm.
thinking for yourself and saying, look, I've got this smartphone with the internet on it. I can type in anything I want. I can find things that are going to help me. I can ask people. I can do simple things like ask questions in class. I can ask my
Mm.
friends, how are you getting these grades in this subject? Could you talk me through it? How
Absolutely,
did you do well
yeah,
in this homework? And it's just taking the initiative to say, look, I'm not just going to give up and say that I can't do this or this is difficult for me. I'm actually going to say, no, 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 I can get better at this. I'm going to do these steps. I'm going to try this on Monday. I'm going to try that on Tuesday, this on Wednesday, this on Thursday. And then I'm going to look
mm.
back on the week, what worked, what didn't work, and do it all over again.
Yeah,
And that's
absolutely,
the approach. And it's a year-long process. And that's the test. It's not just an
yeah,
exam that happens on one day. You are building up to it over the whole course of the year. So if you can take the right
absolutely.
steps, you're going to be in a great position to do well. Anyway, if there are any parents listening to this, what would you say to them about how they can help their child through the exam process? Because you must have seen a lot of parents, you must have talked to a lot of parents.
Yeah,
Everybody has a different style of, there's all this stuff about, oh, I'll give you 50 quid if you get an A. There's that kind of style of parenting.
yeah,
Then there's also the, no, 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 just do it. We don't, just do your best kind of thing. It's fine.
yeah.
What do you think? Do you have any advice for parents?
I wish my parents had said to me, "I'll give you 50 quid for an A," but that's beside the point. No, they, I think, for parents, yeah, you're right. I do speak to a lot of parents, and I have a different relationship with parents than I had. Obviously, when I was a classroom teacher, because I'm seeing them week in, week out, particularly obviously for the ones where because I teach some of my students in their own homes and I teach some online. So the online, maybe I interact a little bit less with the parents, but certainly when I'm in people's homes, I obviously talk to them a lot. And one thing I do try and get across to parents, in terms of preparing for exams is that revision, it doesn't always have to look like work. I think maybe now parents are of a generation where they have sort of started to grow up in the digital age, and they understand that a little bit more. But there's still a lot of parents who think that revision needs to be reading something and writing. And actually, as I say, watching a video on YouTube can be revision. I mentioned earlier that I prepare students for the 11 plus, and there's a game that's available on the Nintendo DS called the Professor Layton games. And the Professor Layton games are sort of like adventure stories, but they've got puzzles in them. And the puzzles are very similar to the types of questions you get on the 11 plus. So I'm always trying to say to, if I happen to see a DS, in the house or something, I'll say, you can get this game, and it's really good practice. That it. But I think there's an uncomfortable about that. Oh, well, they're playing a game, they're not really working. But actually, sometimes things like that can be revision. And so, and just understanding that, I think in terms of just helping making sure that children have a place in the house they can revise, so whether it's the bedroom or another room, somewhere that's quiet. But I think also being realistic, because I think sometimes in the run-up to exams, you've got parents who try to force their children to spend, 6-7 hours a day revising. And for a lot of students, they don't have that sort of level of concentration, and it's actually counterproductive. I know my husband always talks about when he was doing his exams, his parents took his computer away, and before they went off to work, and told him to revise. And the first thing he did when they'd gone to work was went and got the computer and set it back up again. I'm outing him now. Maybe his parents don't know
thank you for that.
Well, he did well in his exams anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But I think so. I don't necessarily think that sort of punitive approach is necessarily the right way. He said he felt more compelled to play the computer. It was almost like rebellion then, because he had it taken away from him. So, I think maybe sometimes parents think, oh, I need to take their phone away or the social media away so that they can get on and do their work. And sometimes that might be, some limitation on screen time. I don't think is a bad thing for any of us, whatever our age. But you don't want to make your teenager, whoever, feel isolated, and that's what can happen if you do too much of that. And I don't think that they're going to be in the right frame of mind necessarily to revise and things. So it's kind of embracing. I think you've got to embrace the modern technology. They're living in a modern world. They're going to work in a modern world. So it's better to embrace what's important to them and what's part of their world, like smartphone apps and things like that, rather than just saying, oh, you need to put your phone away, you're not going to get any work done that way.
I agree. I think doing revision and learning stuff, I always try to see it as having a balanced, healthy diet. You're trying to get a lot of different sources of information in different types on the screen, on the phone, just paper on a desk, old-fashioned style, maybe a movie, maybe a live performance, a play. All these different ways of consuming the information. You got images, sounds, all appeal to the different human senses, because that is ultimately how we digest information that's around us and learn it, and repeatedly doing it. And then obviously trying to replicate the conditions in the exam, which is testing yourself. Like you can't just stare at the information and hope it's going to go in by osmosis. Look at it for a bit and then throw it away and try and write it out, or try and recall it off the top of your head, or try and tell someone about it, and try and recall what happened in the play, or on the, if you go with your family or a few friends, try and recall the 3 key kind of scenes or quotes or lines that you remember. And That's it, really. Is I think it's just that constant exposure to it and trying to make it fun and interesting rather than a
Yeah,
hard task, because that you're
yeah,
just not going to be able to do that.
definitely.
How do
Um,
Rebecca? We're running out of time, but how do uh students or parents find you and get in contact with you if they want to talk more history, English, and tutoring in general?
well, my website is currently under development, so that's not available yet. But I have a Facebook page, so if they search on Facebook for Elliott Educational, Elliott has two L's and two T's, and if they search on Facebook for that, they can find me and message me through that page. I've also got an email, which is Elliott Educational. Again, two L's and two T's on Elliott, at gmail.com. And obviously I'll be able to respond to those emails. So they're currently the best ways to get in touch with me, I would say.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing, Rebecca. I appreciate you
No
coming on
problem.
today, and thank you for sharing some really insightful tips and tricks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.